Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Dalid, and Mirz Hashem today we will be learning Daf Reish Hey Amud Beis. Having said that, we pick up today on Reish Hey Amud Aleph with a new Siman Shin Nun Gimel, Dinei Zizin Bereshus Harabim, the halachas that pertain to ledges or shelves that protrude from a house going out over the Rishus Harabim, Ubay Gimel Seifim, and here we have 3 Seifim. Our learning today should be as chus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael on the Suna Batzara Bashivya Ha'im Debei Bayam Ubei Bayabasha Hamakim Yirachim Aleim V'Yetziim Yitzar Lervacha Me'afelu La'Ira Mishibur L'Geula Hashta Bagolo V'Zman Kariv and Amar Amen. Our learning should be as chus Refuah Shalema for Meiri V'Rabi Reb Shalom Ruvain ben Shima for Moshe Meir ben Esther Fradel Yitzchak ben Sion ben Dusha Rivka Bashir Alea, Chava Hadassah Bas Razel Serel, and Yeshua Levi ben Huva Malkachana, Gila Shifra Bas Ilana Udal. They should all have a Refuah Shalema B'Soich Shar Chayla Yisrael. So, I want to give a little bit of a hakdama to Sif Aleph. Sif Aleph is going to be discussing a case where we have 2 houses that are opposite each other across the Rishus Harabim. So you've got a bona fide Rishus Harabim, you've got a street that's a Makom Hiluch Harabim, it is 16 amas wide at least, it's not roofed over, it has no mechitzos, maybe it's even a Makom Hiluch Shishim Ribu, maybe it serves 600,000 people. So this street is a bona fide Rishus Harabim. And you've got 2 houses that are across the street from each other. One house is on one side of the Rishus Harabim, and then opposite it, on the other side of the Rishus Harabim, there's another house. So you have 2 houses, each one a bona fide Rishus HaYachid, and they are separated by a bona fide Rishus Harabim. Now, to make this simple, let's imagine that both of these houses have flat roofs. Now, the roofs of the homes are also a Rishus HaYachid, right? You've got a house, it's certainly more than 10 tefachim tall, it's certainly more than Dalet al Dalet, and the top, the roof, is going to be Rishus HaYachid. Now, you've got somebody standing on the roof of one house, on one side of Rishus Harabim. You've got another person standing on the roof of the other house across the street, the other side of Rishus Harabim. And the Ruvain, on one side of the Rishus Harabim, wants to take an item, and he wants to throw it across the Rishus Harabim, so that Shimon could catch it and get it on the other side of the Rishus Harabim. So now, if we do the basic math over here, what's the halacha? Basically what you're doing is, Ruvain is making an akira in Rishus HaYachid, on the roof on one side of the street, and he wants to throw the object to the Rishus HaYachid on the other side of the street, so that he's making a hanacha on the other side of the street. So, akira in a Rishus HaYachid, hanacha in another Rishus HaYachid, but you are traversing, I'm going to say this the way I'm saying it now, but we'll see a little bit different. If you're going through the Rishus Harabim, so you're traversing Rishus Harabim. You're throwing from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaYachid, but you're going through a Rishus Harabim. What's the halacha in that case? Well, we learned the halacha of that case back in Siman Shin Mem Hey in a very lengthy Mishnah Berurah. We could see this. I'm sorry, did I say Shin Mem Hey? I don't think I meant Shin Mem Hey. I meant Shin Mem Vav, right? Is that what I meant? Nope, I meant Shin Mem Zayin. We learned this in Shin Mem Zayin in a lengthy Mishnah Berurah. You could see this on Reish Beis Amud Aleph. The Mishnah Berurah begins on Reish Aleph Amud Beis. It's Mishnah Berurah Ois Kat Ches. But what we're looking for is on Reish Beis Amud Aleph. In my print, it's at the end of the very first line of the Mishnah Berurah, where the Chavetz Chaim says, Hazoyrek me Rishus Harabim l'Rishus Harabim or Rishus HaYachid be'emtza. If somebody would throw an object from one Rishus Harabim to another Rishus Harabim, but he's traversing Rishus HaYachid in the middle. That's not our case. Our case comes now. Or me Rishus HaYachid l'Rishus HaYachid. Somebody throws an object from one Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid, or Rishus Harabim be'emtza, and there's a Rishus Harabim in the middle. So that's our case. House, Rishus HaYachid on one side of the street, house, Rishus HaYachid on the other side of the street, Rishus HaRabim in the middle. If you would throw something from one Rishus HaRabim to another Rishus HaRabim, from one Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid, but through the Rishus HaRabim, what's the halacha, says the Chavetz Chaim in Shin Mem Zayin? Potter. What does potter mean? Potter aval aser. It's not an Issa Daraisa, because what did you do? You made an Akira in one Rishus HaYachid, you made a Hanach in another Rishus HaYachid. That's not an Issa Daraisa, but it's an Issa Darabanan. Why is it an Issa Darabanan? Because if we allow you to go from one Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid and traverse the Rishus HaRabim, we're afraid that you might come to make a Hanacha in the Rishus HaRabim. And if you make a Hanacha in the Rishus HaRabim, then you are over in Issa Daraisa. You made a Hanacha in Rishus HaYachid, an Akira in Rishus HaYachid number 1. You made a Hanacha in the Rishus HaRabim in the middle. Now you have an Issa Daraisa. So that halacha we saw already in Shin Mem Zayin. Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaYachid through a Rishus HaRabim is an Issa D'Rabbanan. Now, the Mechaber over here is going to discuss this case with a little bit of a twist. You didn't go from house number 1 to house number 2 through the Rishus HaRabim. You went from house number 1 to house number 2 over the Rishus HaRabim. Remember, the Avir Rishus HaRabim is only ad Asara. The airspace of Rishus HaRabim only goes up till 10 Tfachim. 10 Tfachim? Somewhere 37 to 40 inches. If you're standing on the roof of house number 1 and you're thrown to the roof of house number 2, chances are very good you're going to be over 10 Tfachim. So in that case, you're not throwing from a Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid through Rishus HaRabim. You're throwing from a Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid through a Makom P'tur, because you're going over 10 Tfachim. And that, the Mechaber is going to say, is Mutar Lagamri. So this is the case that we're going to start off Siman Shin Nun Gimel with, where 2 houses across the street, on each side of the Rishus HaRabim, and you're throwing something from house number 1 to house number 2. Now, there's another little variable that we have to throw in here, and that is as follows. If the 2 houses are owned by the same person, so this is relatively simple. Ruvain owns 2 houses. He has 1 house on one side of the Rishus HaRabim. Maybe him and his wife stay in that house to preserve their sanity. And across the street, he has Kanai Nahara 10 Bacharim who are in the house across the street that he also owns. That's the dormitory. Okay? So everybody's sanity is preserved, the parents and the children. And now they want to throw something from the parents' house on one side to the kid house, the dormitory, on the other side of the street. Now, in that case, it's relatively simple. You're throwing something from one Rishus HaYachid that's owned by Ruvain, through the Makom Torah L'mayla B'Yud over the Rishus HaRabim, to another Rishus HaYachid, to the house across the street, that's also owned by Ruvain. No problem. But what if both houses are not owned by Ruvain? What if Ruvain owns the house on one side of Rishus HaRabim, Shimon owns the house on the other side of Rishus HaRabim? Now you introduce a new wrinkle in halacha, and that is, you're not allowed to transfer something from one Rishus HaYachid owned by one person to another Rishus HaYachid owned by another person. Midrabanan, that is usher, unless you make an Eruvei Chatzeros. So if I have a house right next door to somebody else's house, and even if there's a door inside that opens up that could connect one house to the other, so I can knock on the door and I could walk into Shimon's house, I'm not allowed to bring Shimon Cholent from my house to his house unless we combine our houses in an Eruvei Chatzeros. If we make it a Eruvei Chatzeros, then it's fine. But if we don't make it a Eruvei Chatzeros, you're not allowed to do this, because you're going from one person's Rishus HaYachid to another person's Rishus HaYachid. That's an Issa D'Rabbanan. Why? Because it feels like you're transferring from one kind of Rishus to another kind of Rishus. Because this is my Rishus, that's his Rishus. So there's an Issa D'Rabbanan unless you make it a Eruvei Chatzeros. So, if house number 1 on one side of the Rishus HaRabim is owned by Ruvain, and house number 2 on the other side of the Rishus HaRabim is owned by Shimon, and you want to throw something from one roof to the other, then yeah, you're going from a Rishus HaYachid through a Makom P'tur to another Rishus HaYachid. As far as the halachas of being Moitzi me Rishus l'Rishus, this is no problem. But since they're owned by two different people, you would also have to have an eruv chatzeros. That's going to bring up an interesting question, which we'll see in the Biur Halacha, which is, how could you make it a eruv chatzeros in that case? Not simple to make it a eruv chatzeros in that case. We'll see that. But against that backdrop, let's take a look here at Sif Aleph. Says the Mechaber, Shnei batim b'shnei tzidei Rishus Harabim. You have two houses, one on each side of the Rishus Harabim. V'hem shel adam echad. Case number one is the more simple case. Reuven owns both houses. That's case number one. Oy. Or, says the Mechaber, shel shnayim. Or, maybe the house on one side is owned by one person, and the house on the other side is owned by a different person. But, ve'ervu. But they made an eruv chatzeros together. So now that they made an eruv chatzeros, you're allowed to transfer from one private house to the other private house. Says the Mechaber, im shnehem shavim, if the two houses are level with each other as far as height. So the two houses are both ranches. They're both one-story houses with flat roofs. So if Reuven goes up to his roof and Shimon goes up to his roof, or Reuven goes up to his roof and Reuven's kids go up to the house on the other side of the street, height-wise, they're level with each other. Shavim, if they're level with each other, mutter lizraik mizelazeh. You're allowed to throw an object from one roof to the other roof. Let's pause over there and let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kan Aleph, ve'ervu. In the second case, Reuven owns the house on one side of the street, Shimon owns the house on the other side of the street, so they needed a eruv chatzeros. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the b'lo ervu, if they didn't make an eruv chatzeros, haloi asal taltal merishus l'rishus, you wouldn't be allowed to transfer an object from one house to the other. I feel a b'lo hefsik rishus harabim bein time klal. Even if they're not, forget the halachas of being moitzi merishus l'rishus across a rishus harabim or a makom p'tur. You're not allowed to transfer from one house to the other because you don't have any eruv chatzeros. It's an issa d'Rabbanan. Ois cotton bays, shavim. The Mechaber said, if the two houses are of the same height, Ritzana Larmar, what the Mechaber means to say is, the kevan shehem shavim. Why is this important? That they have to be equal in height? Because since they're equal in height, ein tzarich la'amein yadav lizrika, you don't have to very carefully aim and throw carefully from one to the other, shelo yipal hachefetz lamata, to make sure that the object does not accidentally fall into the Rishus Harabim. Oh, so basically, again, the Mechaber said, you want to throw from one house to the other, and you want to do it over the Rishus Harabim, that you're allowed to do. But there's a caveat. The caveat is the two houses have to be of the same height. Why? Because if they're of the same height, Chazal felt that it's very easy to throw from one house to the other, and the object that you throw will land on the roof of the other house. But if they're not the same height, let's say Reuven's house is a one-story house, Shimon's house across the street is a three-story house. Now, Reuven, when he throws, it's a more difficult throw to make sure that he's going to get it up there and it's going to land on the roof. And if he messes up the throw, what's going to happen? It's going to land in the Rishus Harabim. Now, what's the problem with it landing in Rishus Harabim? So many of you are thinking right now, Rabbi Weiss, what do you mean, what's the problem if it lands in Rishus Harabim? If it lands in Rishus Harabim, you made an Akira in Rishus HaYachid, you made a Hanoch in Rishus Harabim, you were just over in Issa D'Oraisa. Oh, well, I'll tell you, not really. He didn't mean to throw it into the Rishus Harabim. He meant to throw it onto the Rishus HaYachid. So you'll come back and say, oh, okay, it's a b'shoigig, so he's a chai v'chatos. No, that's not called shoigig. Shoigig, Rabbi say, is not, oh, it was an accident. Shoigig is either I forgot that it was Shabbos, or I forgot that it's Asr. But that I meant to throw it over there and it landed over there is not called shoigig. What that is called misasik. Misasik means I never intended for this to happen. I never wanted it to happen. I was busy. I was misasik. I was involved in throwing it across to the Rishus HaYachid. It didn't work out. It fell in the Rishus Harabim. That's not a chiv chatos. That's not even a chiv chatos. That's like Potter in Gansen. It was misasik. It's not what I meant to do. I meant to do something else. So why is it a problem? The problem is we're concerned that if you took something and you wanted to throw it across the street to the Rishus HaYachid and it fell into the Rishus Harabim, you might get up now, go into the Rishus Harabim, get it, and bring it back to the Rishus HaYachid. That's what we're concerned with. And that's why the Mechaber says, when is this mutter? If the houses are shavim. If the houses are shavim, then we're not concerned with that. Now let's go to Sif Gimel. Says the Chavetz Chaim, ultimately, why is this mutter? Mutter Lizraik. Explains the Mishnah Berurah what's unspoken by the Mechaber. Says the Mishnah Berurah, why is this mutter? V'dafka lamayla me'asara. The reason it's mutter is because you're not throwing through the Rishus HaRabim. You're throwing over the Rishus HaRabim. You're throwing lamayla me'asara so that you're throwing through a makom p'tur. To have him a Rishus HaYachid, l'Rishus HaYachid, derech makom p'tur. Ava lamata me'asara. But if you wanted to throw it across the street lower than 10 tfachim, aser, that would be an issa d'Rabbanan that we saw back in Shin Mem Zayin. Now let's go back into the Mechaber, second line into the Siman. Says the Mechaber, let's say they're not shavim. Let's say one house is taller than the other. In that case, aser lizraik mizel hazeh, then you're not allowed to throw from one house to the other, even though you're traversing a makom p'tur. You're not traversing Rishus HaRabim. It is still aser. Why is it aser? Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Ois Katan Dalet. Gavoya mechaveroi. If one house is taller than the other, dekevin shekavoya mechaveroi. Now, since one house is taller than the other one, tzarich letzamtzem yodoi bezrika. Now the thrower has to aim carefully. He has to make a good throw. The chayshinan, and we're concerned, shema lo yechavin kolkach. Maybe he won't do a good job aiming. V'yipol haaretz. And maybe the object will fall down to the ground in Rishus HaRabim. V'asi la'asuye. And then the Gemara says we have to be concerned that you might walk into the Rishus HaRabim, go get the chayfetz, and bring it back to Rishus HaYachid. Continues the Mechaber, and the Mechaber says that there's a carve-out. Since the concern is that we're afraid the chayfetz might fall into the Rishus HaRabim, and you might go and get it and bring it back to Rishus HaYachid, there's a carve-out. Elim kain hein kli cheres, unless what you're throwing is an earthenware keli or a glass keli. Why is that a carve-out? V'kayotze shem yiplu yishberu. If you're throwing something that should it fall, it will break, well, in that case, there isn't anything to be concerned about, right? If you're throwing a glass vase across the Rishus HaRabim so that Shimon could put his wife's, well, we're talking about on Shabbos, whatever it is. If you're throwing a china serving bowl for the cholent across the street to Shimon's house, so even if Shimon's house is taller, what are we going to be concerned about? That it might fall in the Rishus HaRabim and you might go and get it? You're not going to go and get it. It's in 50 pieces on the ground. So that would be okay. Okay, continues the Mechaber. Says the Mechaber, Bamed Dvarim Amurim. When do we have this halacha? When is this halacha germane? B'Rishus HaRabim Oiveres Beineim. This whole story is when what's between the two houses is a Rishus HaRabim. Avalim Hoisa Carmelis Oiveres Beineim. But if the street between the two houses is a Carmelis, then mutter b'chol gavni. Then it's always mutter to do this. It's always mutter to do what? It's always mutter to throw an object from one house on one side of the street, lamayla miyud, over the airspace of the Carmelis. Remember, Carmelis also only goes up until Yud. Carmelis is edit tefeses ala ad Yud, right? So it's mutter to throw from house one on one side of the street over the Carmelis lamayla miyud to the house on the other side of the street. It's always mutter, even if the houses are not shavim, and it doesn't matter what you're throwing. Why is it mutter? Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting hey Carmelis. If there's a Carmelis separating the two houses, then this is always mutter. Why? The Kevin is a Carmelis ain't element d'Rabbanan loy gazrin on shema yipol to have exera l'xera. Because what's our isser over here? Again, if you're throwing l'mayla miyud, so you're going from a Rishus HaYachid to a Rishus HaYachid through a makom p'tur. There's no room for an issue. If you're throwing lamata miyud, well, then you're going from a Rishus HaYachid to a Rishus HaYachid through a Carmelis. Different story, right? But if you're throwing lamayla miyud, you're going over the Carmelis. What's the big deal? If the houses aren't shavim, if the houses aren't equal, maybe you should be afraid that the object will fall into the Carmelis, and then you'll come to collect it from the Carmelis and bring it back to Rishus HaYachid. Well, if you did that, what would that be? That would be an issa d'Rabbanan. You're not allowed to take from a Carmelis to Rishus HaYachid because you might come to take from a Rishus HaRabim to a Rishus HaYachid. Okay, so we're going to be geyser that you can't throw over the Carmelis because it might fall into the Carmelis, and then you might bring it from the Carmelis to the Rishos HaYachid, which is only usher, because if we let you take from a Carmelis to Rishos HaYachid, you might take from a Rishos HaRabim to a Rishos HaYachid. Well, that, Rabbi Yisai, is a classic Gzera L'Gzera, and we don't make a Gzera L'Gzera. Now, you'll come back to me with the Gra, we treat a Carmelist like we treat a Rishos HaRabim. Yeah, but this is one of the places where it's very easy to see why even the Gra would not have a problem with this. And that's because over here it's not a question of treating a Carmelist the way we treat a Rishos HaRabim. We're not really treating the Carmelist here. We're treating the person that's in a Rishos HaYachid. We're analyzing, can you throw from the Rishos HaYachid through a Makom P'tur to another Rishos HaYachid? And the answer is yes. There's really no reason why that should be usher. The only reason it's usher if there's a Rishos HaRabim underneath where you're throwing it is because of Gzera, right? So now we switch out the Rishos HaRabim for a Carmelist, it very easily becomes Gzera L'Gzera, and therefore the Mechaber says this would be mutter b'chol gavni. Says the Mishnah Berurah is involved b'chol gavni. This is mutter in every case. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Hainu afil echad kavaya mechaveroi, even if one is taller than the other. Aval pashut the dafka b'she'ervu. But still remember, if the Rishos HaYachid on one side of the street has one owner, and the Rishos HaYachid on the other side of the street has a different owner, you're still going to need an eruve chatzeros. Okay, that brings us to the end of Sif Aleph. Okay, so now let's move along to Sif Beis. Sif Beis says to Mechaber, Ziz. What's a Ziz? So the Mechaber tells us what a Ziz is. What a Ziz is. Say that 10 times. Ziz, dahainu daf haboilet min hakoisel. A daf is a board. So you have a board that protrudes from the exterior wall of a house, l'rishos harabim, and it's protruding out above the rishos harabim. So really, if you want to know what a ziz is in English, it's a ledge. You have a ledge coming off of the house, and it's above the rishos harabim. And the Mechaber gives us some more details about this ziz. First of all, lamayla me'asara, turning to Reish Hey Amud Beis. This ledge is located higher than 10 tfachim off the ground level of rishos harabim. Now, we know what that means, right? That means that it's not in the avir of rishos harabim. The avir of rishos harabim only goes up to 10 tfachim. So this ledge is above the avir of rishos harabim. So it's quite literally above the rishos harabim. Where is it located? It's located in Makom P'tur territory. But still, we have to do the math on the ziz and figure out what kind of rishus the ziz itself is. But right away, what the Mechaber told us so far is, you have this zuz, it's protruding out above the rishus harabim, but it's lamayla miyud, so it's over the avir of rishus harabim. How big is the ziz? Says the Mechaber. V'yesh by arba al arba. The ziz has the lateral dimensions of dalet al dalet tfachim or more. And now the last detail that the Mechaber gives us about this ziz is v'chaloin habayis pasuachloi. There's a window that opens up from the house that has access to the ziz. Okay, says the Mechaber, what's the halacha of this ziz? Mishtamshin olav. You are allowed to be mishtamesh. You are allowed to use this ziz from the house, meaning you could open up the window, you could take something from the rishos hayachid inside the house and put it outside onto the ziz, or vice versa. You could open up the window on Shabbos, take something that's located outside on the ledge, and bring it back into the house, and there's no issue. Now, before we go into the Mishnah Berurah, we have to do a little bit of the math, and we have to see something that we learned earlier in Shin Mem Hey. Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. We have a ledge protruding on the outside of the house. The ledge is lamayla miyud. It's more than 10 tfachim elevated off the surface of rishos harabim. And what are its lateral dimensions? Dalet al dalet or more. It's at least dalet al dalet. All right, so what's the halacha of such a platform? You have a platform, lamayla miyud, and it is dalet al dalet. So the truth is that the answer to that is a tricky question. Some of you are jumping up right away, and some of you are saying, oh, Rabbi Weiss, I know, Lamayla Miyud, Daled al Daled, it's a Rishus HaYachid. Well, not so fast. Why are you thinking it's a Rishus HaYachid? Because we talk about a tail, Taf Lamed, a tail, a mound in Rishus HaRabim, or an amud, literally a post or a pillar in Rishus HaRabim, that is Lamayla Miyud and Daled al Daled, that's a Rishus HaYachid. Why is it a Rishus HaYachid? Because we take the outside walls of the amud, of the pillar, or the outside walls of the tail, we use the halacha l'moshe b'sinai of good asik, and we extend those outside walls, the outer walls of the amud or of the tail, we extend them upward using the halacha l'moshe b'sinai of good asik. Now we look at the top surface of the tail or of the amud as if it's mukaf mechitzos. Well, if you have an area that's daled al daled, and it's mukaf mechitzos, well then yeah, it's a Rishus HaYachid. But over here we're talking about a ledge. A ledge does not have exterior walls, right? The ledge is a protrusion going out over the Rishus HaRabim. Are there walls going down beneath the ledge? No, it's just a ledge sticking out into Rishus HaRabim. You know what this is like? This is, imagine you go into the Rishus HaRabim, you take a pole, you take a narrow little pole, and you stick it into the ground of Rishus HaRabim, and you put a platform on top of it that's Daled al Daled. Is the top of that platform a Rishus HaYachid? No. Why isn't it a Rishus HaYachid? Because it's not mukaf mechitzos. What mechitzos are there? It has no mechitzos on top, and there's no mechitzos on bottom that you could say good asik and go up. And we dealt with this in Siman Shin Mem Hey in Sif Tes Zayin, that's on Kuf Tzadik Tes Amud Aleph, where the Mechaber said, Zizin haboltim ben hakoisel, when you have a ledge sticking out of the wall, v'yesh behem arba al arba, and it has daled al daled, what did the Mechaber say? Have it carmelis. The surface is not a Rishus HaYachid, the surface is a carmelis. So again, just so you should understand this very clearly, if you have an amud, if you have a post that's in the Rishus HaRabim and it's 10 tfachim or taller, so then a post has walls on the outside of it, going down, surrounding it, going down. We could use halacha l'moshe b'sinai, we do use halacha l'moshe b'sinai of good asik, and we extend those walls going up so that the top surface of the amud is considered mukaf mechitzos, and the top surface becomes a Rishus HaYachid. But if you don't have those mechitzos on the bottom surrounding it, if you just have a pole and you have a board on top, so then there are no mechitzos to use good asik on. So now it's as if you have kind of a floating daled al daled platform that's up more than 10 tfachim elevated off the Rishus HaRabim. Can't be a Rishus HaYachid, there's no mechitzos. What is it? So the Mechaber holds, what we just saw in Shin Mem Hey, Sif Tes Zayin, the Mechaber holds that would be a carmelis. Now, let's take that kernel of information and let's plug it in to what the Mechaber just told us. The Mechaber just told us, going back to Shin Nun Gimel Sif Beis, the Mechaber just told us, you have a ziz, you have this ledge that's sticking off of the exterior of the house over the Rishus HaRabim. The ziz is lamayla miyud. It's more than 10 tfachim off the ground. It is daled al daled, so it's a makom choshev. But it's got no mechitzos underneath. So according to Shitas HaMechaber, we're going to see Shitas HaGra that argues on the Mechaber in a moment, but according to the Shitas HaMechaber, the surface of that ziz should be a carmelis. Yet, what does the Mechaber say? The Mechaber says you're allowed to open the window of the house and you're allowed to put something from the house onto the ziz or take something from the ziz into the house. Wait a minute, why is that mutter? Aren't you going from a Rishus HaYachid to a carmelis or from a carmelis to a Rishus HaYachid? L'chayre, this should be an Isser D'Rabbanan, no? The answer lies in the details that the Mechaber gave us. So again, let's see what the Mechaber said. The ziz is sticking out l'Rishus HaRabim, l'mayla me'asara, above 10 tfachim, v'yesh by arba al arba, it has the lateral dimensions of daled al daled, should be a carmelis, according to Shitas HaMechaber. But the Mechaber throws in another key piece of information. V'chaloin habayis pasuach loy. The house has a window that opens up onto the ledge. Why is that important? Because we learned another halacha in Shid Memei. We learned the halacha of chayrei rishos hayachid. You have rishos hayachid, and there are holes in the wall of the rishos hayachid. Chayrei rishos hayachid have a din of rishos hayachid. Why? Because chayrei rishos hayachid are bottle to the rishos hayachid. Over here in Shin Nun Gimel Sif Beis, the Mechaber is applying the halacha of chayrei rishos hayachid. Over here, it's true that if you look at the ziz in isolation, the ziz, according to the Mechaber, should be a carmelis, and it should be usher to transfer between the house and the ziz, or for between the ziz and the house. But since there's a chaloin pasuach loy, since you open a window from the house and it opens up onto the ziz gets a din of chayrei rishos hayachid. It's bottled to the rishos hayachid, and the ziz gets a din of rishos hayachid, and therefore, says the Mechaber, mishtamshin alav, you are allowed to use the ziz. Now that is, everything that I just told you, is shitas ha-Mechaber. The Mishnah Berurah, interestingly enough, is going to explain this halacha, and he's going to argue on the Mechaber. But he's not arguing on the Mechaber. He's going to say his halacha according to the Shitas HaGra. I'll give you a sneak peek. Where the Gra argues on the Mechaber is the Mechaber holds that a platform that's Dalid al Dalid, Lamayla Miyud in the Rishos Harabim, but it has no mechitzis under it, like this ziz, the Mechaber holds it's a carmelis. The Gra holds it's not a carmelis. The Gra holds it's a makom p'tur. Even though it's Dalid al Dalid, the Gra looks at it, and the Gra says, carmelis? Why would you make it a carmelis? When do we make something a carmelis? When it's nishtahin, nishtaher. Right? It's not really a Rishos Harabim. It's not really a Rishos Hayachid. We don't know what to do with it. We make it a carmelis, a Rishos D'Rabbanan. The Gra holds this platform is not nishtahin, nishtaher. This platform is Lamayla Miyud. Lamayla Miyud is Makom P'tur territory. It has no mechitzis of any kind. It's clearly not a Makom L'Hiluch Harabim. In what sense is it nishtahin, nishtaher? In what sense is it somewhat similar to a Rishos Harabim and somewhat similar to a Rishos Hayachid? It's not similar to either one. It's not similar to a Rishos Harabim in any way. It's not a Makom Hiluch Harabim, right, in any sense. It's not similar to Rishos Hayachid. It's not Mukaf Mechitzais. It's not. The only comparison it has to Rishos Hayachid is that it's Daled al Daled. That's it. Nothing else. So the Gra says, what do you mean? It's a Makom P'tur. So according to the Gra, for this halacha of the Mechaber to be true, that you're allowed to transfer between the house and the ziz, you don't need a chaloin pasuach loy. You don't need to apply the din of chayrei rishos harabim. According to the Gra, yeah, you could transfer from the house to the ziz. You know why? The house is a rishos hayachid. The ziz is a makom p'tur because it's lamayla miyud. And even though it's daled al daled, there's no mechitzis, not on top, not on bottom. So it's a makom p'tur. So that's it. What do you need a chaloin pasuach loy for? Against that backdrop, the Mishnah Berurah over here should be very, very simple. Let's turn back to Reish Hey Amud Aleph. Says the Mishnah Berurah is Katan Zayin. L'Rishos Harabim. So the first thing that the Mechaber said over here is you should know this ziz is extending over the Rishos Harabim. Now it's interesting that the Mechaber said that. So the Mechaber is dressing up the case that the case is a house that fronts onto the Rishos Harabim, so that the ziz is extending over Rishos Harabim. Why? Why are you picking on Rishos Harabim? Let's say it wouldn't be fronting onto Rishos Harabim. Let's say it would front onto a carmelis. So then this halacha wouldn't be true? Is the halacha of a carmelis different than the halacha of over Rishos Harabim? In this context, says Mishnah Berurah, no. Nakat Rishos Harabim l'revusa. The reason the Mechaber chose to talk about a Rishos Harabim is just to tell you like a bigger chiddush. Da'afilu l'Rishos Harabim. Even though the ziz is extending over the Rishos Harabim, it's still going to be mutter to transfer between the zuz and the house. Why? Because it's l'mayla miyud. De'ein Rishos Harabim teifis l'mayla mayasar. Because, yeah, it extends over the Rishos Harabim, but it's literally over the Rishos Harabim. It's Lamayla Miyud. So it's not in Avir Rishos Harabim. The Choshkedim would Rishos Carmelis to Shari. If it would be extending over a Carmelis, it would be more kuladik It would be more kal if it was extending over the karmelis, if anything. But it's definitely not going to be more chamor. V'ayim is Sif Gimel, but we will see later on in Sif Gimel, tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem, the yesh chiluk bein Rishus Harabim lekarmelis, there is a halachic difference between a ziz that's over a Rishus Harabim or a ziz that's over a karmelis. Le'inyan litein alav kelim she'ein nishbarim nefilasan, in the context of what type of kelim you're allowed to use on this ziz. Do we have to be concerned that if it's a non-breakable keli and it falls off the ziz, you might go and collect it from Rishus Harabim and bring it to the house? Over there could be a difference between a karmelis and a Rishus Harabim. Weiter, Mishnah Berurah Katan Ches. L'mayla me'asara, the Mechaber told us that this ziz is more than 10 tefachim elevated off the Rishus Harabim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, and to understand the coming Mishnah Berurah, again, you need to understand the argument between the Mechaber and the Gra. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'loy me'baya im haya hachaloin pasuach loy besamuch lahaziz besoy shloisha tfachim bevadai mutter lehishtamesh al haziz mitoch hachaloin litein alav v'litel mimenu tehu bechlal chayre rishos hayachid v'kirishos hayachid dami. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Mechaber gave us a lot of detail. He told us that there's a ziz. He said it's lamayla miyud. He said it's dalet al dalet. He said that there's a window that opens onto the ziz. Okay, how close is the window and the ziz? So now the Mishnah Berurah starts to parse this. And the Mishnah Berurah says, look, if the ziz, right, here's the wall of the house, here's the ziz. If the ziz is located within 3 tefachim of the window, so you open up the window and you want to put something down on the ziz is within 3 tefachim of the window. You don't have to reach down very far to put a bottle of orange juice out onto the ziz. The ziz is like right below the sill of the window. It's within 3 tefachim of the opening of the window. Then the halacha of the Mechaber is certainly true. Why? Because now we could very easily apply the halacha of chayrei Rishus Hayachid, because the whole underpinning of Chayrei Rishus Hayachid is that the ziz serves the house, it's bottled to the house, so the house is a Rishus Hayachid, the ziz is Rishus Hayachid. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that's certainly true if the ziz is within 3 tefachim of the window, right? Because then it's like it's connected to the window. So the opening from the house goes straight, so to speak, to the ziz. So the ziz is chayrei rishos hayachid. Since the ziz is chayrei rishos hayachid, the ziz is a rishos hayachid. You go from the house to the ziz, it's rishos hayachid to rishos hayachid. So too vice versa. So says the Mishnah Berurah, that is certainly true. Turning to Reish and Beis, but says the Mishnah Berurah, Ella, you should know, halacha lamaisa, even though what the Mishnah Berurah is about to say is not true according to the Mechaber. Ella, you should know, halacha lamaisa, afilu im haya hachaloin muflug mimenu harbe. Even if the chaloin, the window, is far away from the ziz, you want to put a bottle of orange juice out on the ziz, you're going to have to reach down. It's not within 3 tefachim of the chaloin. So we can't say that the chaloin and the ziz are connected to each other. And we cannot apply the halacha of chayrei rishos harabim. Ela afilu im haya chaloin muflig mimenu harbe. Af al pikein muter lehishtamesh al haziz. You're still allowed to make use of the ziz. You know why? Because of the shitas hagra. The kol shehu lamayla me'asara chashvina leikamakim p'tur. Because now the Mishnah Berurah is going into shitas hagra territory. And he's saying, remember, according to the gra, this ziz, this platform, that's dalet al dalet, and it's lamayla miyud, is never going to be a karmelis. It's a mokum p'tur. According to the Mechaber, it's a karmelis. Since according to the Mechaber, it's a karmelis, it's not mutter unless we could apply the halach of chayrei rishos hayachid. But according to the gra, there's no tzad for it to be a karmelis. According to the gra, it's a mokum p'tur. So what do I need a chaloin? Why do I need a chaloin pasuach loy? I don't need the halacha of chayrei rishos hayachid. So even if the ziz is more than sheer lavud, it's more than 3 tefachim away from the window, it's still mutter, because you're going from a rishos hayachid to a makom p'tur, or from a makom p'tur to a rishos hayachid. Now, you could see the back of the story here in Sharitzion Ois Katan Vav, where the Chavetz Chaim says, Maskanas hagra b'soif hasimin zeh, v'chein b'simin shin mem hey sif tezayin, al pishitas harambam v'rashi v'toises v'rashba, deloi k'moy shasasam sham b'shulchan aruch sif tezayin. I'm saying this according to the Gra that argues on the Mechaber in shin mem hey. Okay? Going weiter in the Mishnah Berurah. Umashma mistimas ha-mechaber. It is implied from the general way that the Mechaber wrote this, right? One of the details that the Mechaber gave me is that the ziz is lamayla miyud. Mashma mistimas ha-mechaber. Demahaya haziz lamata me'asara. Let's say the ziz was not elevated more than 10 tefachim off the Rishos Harabim. Let's say the ziz protruded from the house in avir Rishos Harabim. Well, the Mechaber seems to be telling me, when is it mutter? It's mutter if the ziz is above 10 tefachim. But if the ziz is below 10 tefachim, sounds from the Mechaber that this would be aser. So, mashma mistimas ha-mechaber, demahaya ziz lamata me'asara, then, afilu im haya chaloina habayis pasuach loy, besamach loy b'soy shloisha, afilu hachi aser lehishtamesh al aziz, right? What does the Mechaber say? The Mechaber gave us very solid details. Barachel bitcha haktana, the Mechaber told me. The Mechaber told me, in order for this, when is this mutter? It's mutter if the ziz is lamayla miyud. It's mutter if the ziz is dalet al dalet. It's mutter if there's a chaloin pasuach loy. Okay, what if we take away some of that detail? Let's say the ziz is lamata miyud. Well, it sounds like, from the Mechaber, if the ziz is lamata miyud, even if it's dalet al dalet and there's a chaloin pasuach loy, it's going to be usher to use the ziz. Now, why? Why isn't it still chayrei rishos hayachid, right? The underpinning of the Mechaber's heter is that the ziz is bottled to the bias, and therefore it's a rishos hayachid. So fine. So let's say the ziz is in the avir of rishos harabim. So what? If there's a chaloin that opens onto it, and it's within 3 tefachim, so we should say that the ziz is chayrei rishos hayachid, and it should be mutter. I don't care that it's in avir of Rishos Harabim. It's chayrei Rishos Hayachid. It should be bottled to the Rishos Hayachid. It should be mutter. Explains the Mishnah Berurah. I'll tell you why. And this is the subject of a machlokes rishonim that we saw in the Mishnah Berurah in Shin Mem Hey. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Vatam. The reason this would be aser is the kevan shu b'soich hasara. Because if the ziz is within 10 tefachim of Rishos Harabim, noyach gam libnei Rishos Harabim lehishtamesh al aziz. If the ziz is protruding into Rishos Harabim, and it's less than 10 tefachim off the ground, Rabbi Isai, so that means it's approximately 3 feet off the ground, or lower, well then it's something that's very convenient for the Bnei Rishos Harabim to use. So now you have a ziz that could equally be used by the Bnei Rishos Hayachid, the people who live in the house, who could open the window and put orange juice on the ziz, or the people in Rishos Harabim who are walking by and could put something on the ziz. Such a ziz doesn't get the din of chayrei Rishos Hayachid. V'lo yav b'chlal chayrei Rishos Hayachid. Why not? Ki im b'chlal karmelis. Now it's a karmelis. V'asel hishtamish alav litin alav litin mimenu bein Rishos Harabim ubein mitoch hachaloin. Remember, we spoke about this in Shin Mem Hey. If you have a ledge that could equally be used by the people in Rishos Harabim or the people in Rishos Hayachid, now we cannot say that it's bottled to the Bnei Rishos Hayachid. And we saw a sheet over there that the Bnei Rishos Hayachid may refrain from using it. Because since it's so easy to be used by the people in Rishos Harabim, they're not going to use it from the house. They're going to put a bottle of orange juice, somebody in Rishos Harabim will just take it and walk away. So they're not going to use it. So now it's not bottled to the Rishos Hayachid. Oh, if it's not bottled to the Rishos Hayachid, so then what is this platform? Okay, according to the Mechaber, we're in Mechaber land now, right? The Mishnah Berurah is explaining the Mechaber. The Mechaber said, in order for this to be mutter, it has to be lamayla miyud. If it's lamata miyud, it's not mutter. Why? Because the underpinning of the Mechaber is chayrei Rishos Hayachid. According to the Mechaber, if you cannot apply the halach of chayrei Rishos Hayachid, then this platform is a karmelis. It's dalet al dalet. It's more than 3 tefachim off the ground of Rishos Harabim, right? So wherever it is, it's a karmelis, according to the Mechaber. Even if it's lamayla miyud, it's a karmelis. But if it's lamata miyud, it's definitely a karmelis. So then it's a karmelis. If it's a karmelis, So no, you can't take anything on and off it, not from Rishos HaRabim, not from Rishos HaYochid. That is why the Mechaber said that B'dafka the Ziz has to be Lamayla Miyud. Lamayla Miyud, okay, so it's either a Carmelis, according to the Mechaber, or if it's Chayre Rishos HaYochid, because there's a window, it's a Rishos HaYochid. But Lamata Miyud, there's no tzad for it to be Rishos HaYochid, because we would not apply the halacha of Chayre Rishos HaYochid, so it's a Carmelis, and then this would be awesome. Moving along to Mishnah Berurah's cut and test. One of the details that the Mechaber gave us over here about this ziz is that it is Dalet al Dalet. Now, that's puzzling. Why is that a pertinent detail? The halacha that the Mechaber is telling me is, you should know you're allowed to be mishtamish from the house to the ziz or from the ziz to the house. Okay, what if the ledge would not be Dalet al Dalet? Let's say the ledge would be Gimel al Gimel. What, then it would be Aser? I mean, if it's less than Dalet al Dalet, the ziz, then the ziz is definitely a Makom P'tur. Again, according to the Mechaber, since the ziz is Dalet al Dalet, according to the Mechaber, it would be a Carmelis without the halach of Chayre Rishos HaYochid. But if it's less than Dalet al Dalet, there's no tzad for it to be a Carmelis. So if it's less than Dalet al Dalet, the ziz is definitely a Makom P'tur. So then it's certainly mutter to transfer between the house and the ziz and the ziz and the house. So why is the Mechaber telling me, like, B'dafka, it has to be Dalet al Dalet? That's the problem that the Mishnah Berurah has over here in Ice Cut and Test, and he's going to answer it. Let's see what the Mishnah Berurah says. V'yesh ba'arba al-arba. Lefi ma'asha pasuk ha-Mechaber b'sif gimel. According to what we're going to see in Sif Gimel, the b'kelim she'enam nishbarim aser, the Mechaber in Sif Gimel is going to bring up another potential issue with allowing you to use a ziz, to use a ledge. This ledge, Rabbi Yisai, is not a porch. It doesn't have a railing. It doesn't have walls. It's just a ledge, a flat ledge that sticks out, that's not surrounded by anything. What the Mechaber is going to mention in Sif Gimel is that we have to be concerned that if you put a keli out on the ledge, and it's the type of keli that if it falls off into Rishos HaRabim, it won't break, then there are times that you're not allowed to use the ziz. Why? Because of Xera. We're afraid. If you put a keli on the ledge and it falls off, you might go down to the Rishos HaRabim, pick it up, and bring it back into the house. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, let's follow the paper trail here. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Lefi matcha pasuk ha-Mechaber b'sif gimel de b'kelim she'enam nishbarim aser. The Mechaber in Sif Gimel is going to say, no, you're not allowed to use the ziz with kalim that won't break because of a concern that you might go pick them up and bring them back into the house. Shemi yiplu v'asi l'suyim Rishos HaRabim. And therefore, we have to say that here in Sif Beis, when the Mechaber is telling you that you're allowed to use the ziz, so over here in Sif Beis, when the Mechaber is being matir using the ziz, he has to be talking about breakable kalim. He has to be talking about items where there is no concern that you might go down to the Rishos HaRabim and bring them back from the Rishos HaRabim, because if they fall, they're going to break. Vim Kain, if so, is arba al arba, then I don't see why the Mechaber is picking on Dalet al Dalet. Even if the ziz is very small, even if it's less than Dalet al Dalet, Shem motzoi sheyiplu mimenu, and therefore, since it's a tiny ziz, it's very easy to see that whatever you put there may very well fall off into the Rishos HaRabim. So in other words, what the Mishnah Berurah is saying is like this. I'm puzzled why the Mechaber told us that in order for this to be mutter, the ziz has to be Dalet al Dalet. Now you might come back to me and you might tell me, oh, I'll tell you why. Maybe the reason is because if the ziz is Dalet al Dalet, so it's stable. So if you put something out there, we don't have to be concerned that it's going to fall. But if it's a tiny ledge, then we're afraid you're going to put something out there, it's going to fall off, and you're going to come to bring it back from the Rishos HaRabim. Maybe you'll tell me that. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that can't be. Because the Chavetz Chaim is going to tell us, the Mechaber is going to tell us, that is always a concern. That's a concern even with a big ziz. And the only time you're allowed to use a ziz is if you use something that's going to smash when it falls off. So okay, so this heter is talking about kalim that will break if they fall into the Rishos HaRabim. So then what do I care if it's a big ziz or a small ziz? Even if it's a small ziz, it should be mutter. Because there's no concern that you're going to pick up something and bring it back, because it's going to smash. So then Gamken mutter lehistamish alav. So I don't understand, the Mishnah Berurah says. Why is the Mechaber telling me that the ledge has to be dalet al dalet? I had one havamina. Maybe because if it's less than dalet al dalet, it's very easy for things to fall off. And then we're going to make exer, you might come to pick it up or bring it back. But that can't be. Because the Mechaber says that that's a concern even if the ziz is dalet al dalet. So obviously, when the Mechaber's matir using a ziz, he's talking about kalim that will smash. So then, why are you picking on dalet al dalet? Says the Mishnah Berurah, yesh loymar b'doichik. Mishnah Berurah says, I have a doichik teretz. Why the Mechaber picks on dalet al dalet? You know why? The nokat dalet al dalet, the reason the Mechaber said dalet al dalet, mishum de mesayim v'hachaloin pasuachloi. Remember the whole thing that I told you a few minutes ago in the beginning of Sif Gimel, Sif Beis. The underpinning of the Mechaber's heter is the halacha of chaloin pasuachloi chayrei rishos hayachid. Right? That's the underpinning of the Mechaber's heter. Really, this ziz should be a karmelis because it's dalet al dalet l'mayla miyud. No mechitzas underneath, no mechitzas on top. It should be a karmelis according to the Mechaber. Why is it mutter to use it? Oh, chayrei rishos hayachid. That's why it's mutter. Says the Mishnah Berurah, maybe that's why the Mechaber said, I'm only talking about a ziz that's dalet al dalet. Because if it was less than dalet al dalet, then you don't need the detail of chaloin pasuachloi. The Mechaber wanted to tell you a specific halacha. The Mechaber wanted to tell me that over here, even though the ziz is dalet al dalet, and according to me it should be a karmelis, but since there's a chaloin pasuachloi, I'm applying the halacha of chayrei rishos hayachid, and it's a rishos hayachid. If we're talking about a ziz that's less than dalet al dalet, there's no havamina to make it a karmelis. It's a makom p'tur. Then I don't need a chaloin pasuachloi. Then there's no reason for the Mechaber to tell me this halacha. That's what the Mishnah Berurah is saying. Ube'ein ba ziz arba ain't tzar sheyeh chaloin pasuachloi. Do makom p'tur ubechol gavni mutter lehistamish alav. Then it would definitely be mutter to use this ziz. Okay, so I know that the share is quite long already, but we're going to do one more piece in the Mechaber, which is going to cover most of the rest of the Mishnah Berurah on today's page. It's a little bit of a complex piece of Mechaber, but with a little bit of a hakdama, I think it'll be very easily understood. The next halacha in the Mechaber is based very much on the halachas of Eruvei Chatzeros. So very basic, just what we need to understand this halacha. If Ruvain has one rishos hayachid that he owns, Shimon has another rishos hayachid that he owns, and they are right next to each other, so that you could go very easily from one to the other, right? Let's say it's a multi-unit residence. It's an apartment building with a couple of apartments. Ruvain has an apartment, Shimon has an apartment, and there's a little hallway, and they could very easily go one to the other. Are you allowed to transport from Ruvain's apartment to Shimon's apartment, or vice versa on Shabbos? No. Midrabanan, you're not allowed to, unless Ruvain and Shimon make an Eruvei Chatzeros together. And the reason you can't, and we mentioned this earlier, is because since each one of these apartments are independently owned, when you go from one to the other, very much it feels like you're going from one rishus to another rishus. You are. You're going from rishus Ruvain to rishus Shimon, or vice versa. Now, that has nothing to do with rishuyos on Shabbos, right? Arba rishuyos on Shabbos. Rishus hayachid, rishus harabim, karmelis, and makom p'tur. Ruvain's apartment is a rishus hayachid. Shimon's apartment is a rishus hayachid. So midaraisa, there's absolutely no reason why it would be usher to transfer from Ruvain's apartment to Shimon's apartment or vice versa. But midarabanan, since it does have this feel of going from one rishus to another rishus, Chazal said you're not allowed to transport things from one rishus to the other unless you join them together by an Eruvei Chatzeros. Now, we don't have to go more into the halachas of Eruvei Chatzeros now. Mirz Hashem, Bez Hashem Yisparach, we'll get to the very complex halachas of Eruvei Chatzeros. But this we need to know. You're not allowed to go from your rishus to somebody else's Rishus HaYachid on Shabbos unless they're joined in a Rishus HaYachid. That's the underpinning of the next halacha. And the next halacha is also going to be discussing a case involving zizim, these ledges that extend out of the house. The case that we're going to be dealing with is a 2-story house. Ruvain lives on the first floor. Shimon lives on the second floor. Ruvain has a ziz that extends out on the outside of his apartment going into Rishos HaRabim. And it's exactly the type of ziz that we spoke about before. It's lamayla me'asara, it's dalet al dalet, and it has a window opening onto it. And we already established that when you have a ziz of that type, you're allowed to transfer from inside the house to the ziz, or from the ziz back into the house. We established that in the previous halacha. So Ruvain has that setup, and Shimon, who lives upstairs from Ruvain, has the exact same setup. He also has a window that opens onto his ziz, and his ziz is also l'mayla me'asara dalet al dalet like we learned in the previous halacha. But there's one catch. The catch is that Shimon's upstairs ziz is directly located above Ruvain's ziz. So you have these 2 zizim on the outside of the house. Ruvain's first floor ziz is over here. Shimon's second floor ziz is over here. So that Shimon's ziz is right above Ruvain's ziz, and therein is the rub. The problem is going to be created because Shimon's ziz is located on top of Ruvain's ziz. Now, this is a very interesting example of a halacha in the Mechaber that the Mishnah Berurah chose to be very quiet about. The Mishnah Berurah is not really mefaresh. He doesn't really explain what the underpinning of this halacha is. He just fills in a few details so you get the halacha straight, but he didn't really go into the weeds of being mefaresh the halacha. Let's see it inside. Says the Mechaber. At the end of the line, top line, Reish Hey Amud Beis. Im hayu shnei zizim. If this multi-floor dwelling had 2 zizim, zeh lamata mizeh, one ziz is located directly under the upstairs ziz. Veheim shel shnei anoshim, and the 2 zizim are owned by 2 different people. Ruvain has the downstairs apartment with the ziz. Shimon has the upstairs apartment with the ziz. Okay, says the Mechaber. Af al pi sheshneim lamayla me'asara, even though both zizim are elevated more than 10 tfachim above the ground level of Rishos HaRabim. Why is that important? So that there's no tzad of Rishos HaRabim over here. Both zizim are located above the avir of Rishos HaRabim. Still says the Mechaber, Im yesh ba ziz ha'elyoin shelifnei achaloin roichav arba al arba, if the upstairs ziz that is right outside its window is at least dalet al dalet, and we're going to learn right now the Mechaber the way the Levush learns the Mechaber, and the downstairs ziz is identical. It's also at least dalet al dalet. Aser lehishtamesh alav. You're not allowed to use the upstairs ziz. You're not allowed to take anything from Shimon's upstairs apartment out to Shimon's ziz, or from Shimon's ziz back into Shimon's apartment. What? Why not? Says the Mechaber. You know why not? Because of a Ruvi Chatzeres. What? Says the Mechaber. Mipnei shehu rishus bifnei atzmoi. The upstairs ziz is dalet al dalet, so it's a mokum choshev, and it's big enough to be considered its own independent rishus, and we'll get to that in a moment. V'aziz shetachtov rishus acheres, and the downstairs ziz, Ruvain's first floor ziz, is a different rishus that belongs to a different person, v'oisrin zer al zeh, and therefore they aser each other based on the halachas of a Ruvi Chatzeres. What did we just say? I'll explain it to you the simplest way to understand it, which is the way the Levush understands it. Remember what we learned. These zizim that are outside Ruvain and Shimon's apartments, respectively, the zizim are considered Rishos HaYachid. Really, in the world of the Mechaber, they're Lamayla Miyud, they're Dalet al Dalet, they don't have Mechitzis underneath or on top, they should be a Carmelis. But because the halach of Chayrei Rishos HaYachid kicks in, because they have windows that access them, they became Chayrei Rishos HaYachid, and now they are Rishos HaYachid. So, Ruvain's apartment has a Rishos HaYachid ziz outside its window. Shimon's upstairs apartment has a Rishos HaYachid ziz outside its window. Okay, where's the problem? I'll tell you what the problem is. Ruvain's first floor ziz is a Rishus HaYachid. Okay, how high does the airspace of a Rishus HaYachid extend? Oh, Avi Rishus HaYachid is Adler Rakia. It goes all the way up. Okay, so Ruvain's first floor is Ruvain's Rishus HaYachid. All right, and it has Avir, and its Avir is Oila Adler Rakia. Oh, now let's take a look at Shimon's upstairs is. Well, Shimon's upstairs is also Chayre Rishus HaYachid. It's Shimon's Rishus HaYachid. Not so fast. Is it Shimon's Rishus HaYachid? It is subsumed inside Ruvain's first floor Rishus HaYachid. Ruvain has a Rishus HaYachid ziz right underneath Shimon's upstairs Rishus HaYachid ziz. So Shimon's upstairs Rishus HaYachid ziz is in the avir of Ruvain's Rishus HaYachid ziz. Therefore, says the Mechaber, we run into a problem. Shimon's ziz is not really only Shimon's ziz. Shimon's ziz is really a shared Rishus HaYachid. It is Shimon's. It's Shimon's Chayre Rishus HaYachid. It opens up from Shimon's window to Shimon's apartment, but it is in the avir of Ruvain's downstairs ziz. So in a sense, it's also Ruvain's Rishus HaYachid. Oh, now Shimon's Rishus HaYachid is a shared Rishus. Now, if you go from Shimon's apartment through the window to the ziz, you're not going from Shimon's Rishus HaYachid to Shimon's ziz. You're going from Shimon's Rishus HaYachid to a shared Rishus HaYachid, to a ziz that is Shimon's and Ruvain's. You can't do that without an Eruve Chatzeros. Now, the Mechaber threw in another piece here. The Mechaber said that this hinges upon the fact that the upstairs ziz is Dalet al Dalet. Now, according to the Lavush, he understands, the Mechaber, that this halacha also hinges on the downstairs ziz being Dalet al Dalet. Why? The answer is like this. If the upstairs ziz would not be Dalet al Dalet, then we would not really view it in isolation. We would not separate it from Shimon's Rishus HaYachid. If it would just be Gimel al Gimel, Beis al Beis, we would simply look at it as being an extension of Shimon's apartment, and then, even though it's in the avir of Ruvain's downstairs is, we would not view it independently and say, oh, it's a shared Rishus HaYachid. It's not a Mokum Choshev to be able to get its own designation. Even the Rishus HaYachid designation that it's getting is not its own designation. It's getting the designation of Rishus HaYachid because it's Chayre Rishus HaYachid and it's bottled to Shimon's apartment. If it's Dalet al Dalet, so then it's a Makom Choshev, we could look at it somewhat isolated from Shimon's Rishus. We could say that it is subsumed inside Ruvain's downstairs Rishus HaYachid and it becomes a shared Rishus. But if it's not Dalet al Dalet, we can't do that. Also, the Lavush learns, if the downstairs apartment is not Dalet al Dalet, this halacha wouldn't apply. Because if the downstairs Rishus HaYachid is Dalet al Dalet, even though it's a ziz, if the downstairs ziz is not Dalet al Dalet, even though it's a Rishus HaYachid because of the halacha of Chayre Rishus HaYachid, we're not going to say, okay, Rishus HaYachid is Oila Adler Rakia, so the upstairs is subsumed by it. It's not choshev enough for that. It needs to be Dalet al Dalet for that. So, the way the Lavush learns this halacha only applies if both of the zizim are Dalet al Dalet. The Isser applies to the upstairs ziz. That's the ziz that has the problem, because the upstairs ziz is subsumed by the downstairs ziz because it's in the avir of the downstairs ziz. It becomes a shared rishus, and therefore you can't use it without making it a ruve chatzeros between the two owners. But in the world, according to the Lavush, if either one of these zizim is not Dalet al Dalet, it doesn't apply. If the upstairs is not Dalet al Dalet, we're not going to consider it a shared rishus. If the downstairs is not Dalet al Dalet, we're not going to apply Avir Rishus HaYachid Ayla Rakia. Now the top one is in the Avir of the bottom one. We're going to see in the Mishnah Berurah there are those that disagree. This is the easiest way to understand this halacha here in the Mechaber. And against that backdrop, let's see the very scant words of the Chavetz Chaim here in the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is Katan Yud. Veheim shel. The underpinning of this halacha is Eruv Chatzeros. So it only applies if the two zizim are owned by two different people. Aval shel ish echad. But if Ruvain owns both floors, then this whole thing goes out the window. Shari, then everything is mutter. Kevin Shem shel rishos echad. V'im ervu yachad, and if Reuven and Shimon made in a Eruv Chatzeros, also this is not negeya. Afilu shel shnei anashim shari, even if it belongs to two different people. So what? They joined in a Eruv Chatzeros, everything is fine. Also, lehishtamesh, you're not allowed to use the ledge, the ziz, meaning what it means you're not allowed to use it. You're not allowed to transfer between the ziv and the house and the ziz. Says the Mishnah Berurah, there is a carve out to this halacha, and that is dafka b'kelim sheshavsu b'say chabayis. This is only true regarding kelim that were located inside the house during Ben Hashmashas when Shabbos came in. So you have a china bowl that was inside the house when Shabbos came in by Ben Hashmashas. You're not going to be allowed to put it outside on the ziz on Shabbos, but a keli that started outside on the ziz, a flower pot, if it's not muktzah, something that was on the ziz, a pitcher that was on the ziz, ben hashmashas, when Shabbos came in, you would be allowed to take it from the ziz to the house, from one ziz to the other. Why? Because it doesn't require an Eruv Chatzeros. Why doesn't it require an Eruv Chatzeros? Because there's a carve-out in the halacha of Eruv Chatzeros that as much as without an Eruv Chatzeros, you're not allowed to transfer from one person's house to another person's house, that is negayah to houses. It's not negayah to other types of Rishus Hayachids that are not houses. Something that started off in a Rishus HaYachid that's not a house, you could transfer it to another Rishus HaYachid that's not a house without a Rishus HaYachid, without an Eruv Chatzeros. That's very high level. That's Shin Samach, Shin Ayin Beis. Miz Hashem will flesh it out when we get there. Moving along, Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Yud Beis. Zeh al zeh. The two porches aser each other. Now we're going to go Mikal al Kavod over here. I gave you this halacha according to the Levush. Now we're going to see some complications. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ritzon Loimar. What the Mechaber means to say is Bein ha'elyon ubein ha'tachton. You're not allowed to use either one of the zizim. Now again, according to the Levush, the Mechaber's Isser really only applies to the upstairs ziz. Shimon, who lives upstairs, cannot transfer from his house to the ziz, from his ziz to the house, because it's subsumed by the downstairs ziz. But Ruvain downstairs, Ruvain, according to the Levush, is free and clear. Now the Mishnah Berurah is saying, really, the Mechaber holds that neither one of them are allowed to use the ziz. Right away, the Mishnah Berurah says, Valavush, mekel b'tachton. The Levush says, downstairs, Ruvain, he could use his is. It's only Shimon upstairs who can't use his is. Okay, why do some people differ with the Magen Avram? Well, we're going according to the Levush that the upstairs is subsumed by the downstairs is. There are those that suggest that the downstairs is also subsumed by the upstairs is, because the same way Avir Rishus Harabim is Oila Adler Rakia, it also goes down Adler Tahaim. So there are those that say that the downstairs is also subsumed by the upstairs. Machlekes hapaiskim. Kasav Magen Avram Sheba Magen Mishnah. The Magen Avram says in the name of the Magen Mishnah, Da'afilu ein batachtoin arba gam ken oisrin elu alelu. Oh, guess what? The Magen Mishnah tells us a whole different approach to this halacha. We're basing the halacha on the Levush that the bottoms is Oila Adler Rakia, it subsumes the tops is, but that's only Negeya if the bottoms is Dalet al Dalet. Magen Mishnah says this halacha applies even if the downstairs is not Dalet al Dalet. Why? Because he has a whole different understanding of this halacha. High level, what's the Magen Mishnah's explanation? He says it's based on a different halacha of Eruv Chatzeros, which is if you have two reshuyos owned by two different people, and they're not partitioned off one from the other, you're not allowed to carry on to them. Forget going from one to the other. You're not allowed to put anything into or onto one of them without an Eruv Chatzeros with the neighbor. Why? Because since these Rishuyos, in our case the Zizim, since the Zizim are not partitioned off, they're wide open to each other, even though one's upstairs and one's downstairs, but there are no mechitzas between them. Therefore, since they are not joined in an eruve chatzeros, not only are you not allowed to transfer one to the other, you're not allowed to transfer from a house to either one of them. Why? Lest you then come to transfer from one to the other. Based on that explanation of this halacha, we don't need dalet al dalet. Even if the bottom one is not dalet al dalet, this halacha is still going to kick in. The Lavush, based on his understanding, disagrees with this. The Kasabel, Yerabah Shekenu Gamkein Ba'avodas HaKodesh. Okay, we're going to pause over here. We still have a little bit more left to this, but as you can see, we did the vast majority of the Mishnah Berurah over here on Reish Hey Amud Beis. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah, for having the patience and bearing with me for such a long share. And the schus of limud HaTorah, should be big, and on Gans Klal Yisrael, the Rebbeinu should send Yeshua's refuahs parnasa sheduchim to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the BS called Tzedek b'meherav Yameinu Amen. Be well.